Now, to take this big claim further, we are being joined by Greg Swinson from London. He is a partner at Brig McAdam. Mr. Swinson, thank you so much for joining us here on WION. What do you make of this claim that China is militarizing space on the pretext of civilian programs?
Yeah, I think Bill Nelson has a really good point that he made. And, they're going to dress it up as civilian space exploration. But, first of all, you can't really trust anything that comes out of China and the CCP. So I think you have to look at it with a more critical lens. And yes, it looks like we are in a space race. They've done a lot of development, the Chinese, in the last 10 years, as you pointed out. So there is a bit of a space race. We haven't had a so-called Sputnik moment yet, where which refers to the Soviets beating the U.S. to space in the late 1950s with their first spaceship to orbit the Earth. However, the U.S. responded. They really responded to that Sputnik moment and were the first to land on the moon and the first to have a man on the moon in 1969. So, I think ultimately the U.S. won that space race. Are we in another one? Probably yes. If China surprises us with an announcement that they've landed on the moon or they've landed a ship on the moon, that could be a real Sputnik moment. But in the meantime, the U.S. in many ways is falling behind because of the constraints, the budget constraints on NASA currently.
Mr. Swinson, everyone keeps referring to the space race, but is the space race really bad? Isn't it actually good for the entire humankind?
Well, it would be if it was done with good intentions, and if there was, and it should, and I would argue it should be. It should be a civilian and a race for humanity, not for military power. But unfortunately, we can't trust the Chinese, much like we couldn't trust the Russians in the 50s and 60s. So, I think I'd like to have that, rose-colored lens, but unfortunately, the Chinese are expanding. They are an adversary of the West, and I think they have to be treated that way. So they might dress this up as a civilian exploration for now, but that will change, and we're already seeing evidence of that in space.
Right, you make a fair point there. For our viewers, Mr. Swinson, please breaking down, what does militarization of space actually mean?
Well, yeah, I think the most obvious is the ability to execute military missions from satellites. So it's not as much of a race in space, of one satellite being aggressive against another, but it's more the ability of satellites and hypersonic missiles to execute on the ground, on the Earth. Actually, the other big challenge is there could be potentially mineral resources on the moon, which, I know this is hypothetical, but if China were to land on the moon before 2026, when the U.S. Artemis 3 plans on landing, that could be an issue where they stake claim to those minerals. And that, I know that's a little bit far-fetched, but we, again, it's hard to anticipate what they could do. And the other challenge too is the amount of money they're spending on space exploration. I just can't imagine they would do that without military intentions. The United States is in many ways cutting NASA spending because the budget increases have only been 2%, the last 2 or 3 years. So, granted, it's $25.4 billion. That's a big number for 2025. But in inflation-adjusted terms, it's actually a cut, a 2% increase when we've had successive years of high inflation, 9%, and then mid-single digits, and currently 3%. That, essentially is a cut. So the NASA has lost $1.4 billion in buying power.
All right, Mr. Swinson, thank you so much for getting us all those updates.
Thanks for having me.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.